I'm assuming Connie isn't having this class.
Hello, good morning.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, my apologies, just some technical difficulty over here. I'm glad you're impatient.
Yeah, we lost a lot of participants. Let me
I know. Such
okay.
such is the nature of our online classes.
That's it. It happens.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad I tried one more time.
Good. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And a beautiful morning is. I would like to dedicate today's class to for a refuah shalema to Nachamadina Bas Esther Hadassah. And it's actually her birthday today. Her muzzle should shine. Hashem should send her a speedy, complete recovery. And Hashem should send refuah to the whole world, to all who need healing, and bring an end to this exile. That will about cover everything.
Yeah. Amen. What's her name again? Nachamadina?
Nachamadina Bas Esther Hadassah.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So in our prayer class, we find ourselves at the end of the blessings of the Shema. So we're going to finish that and start to talk about the Shema today. In the blessings of the Shema, the blessing that we were discussing, Avas Olam Avtanu Hashem Elokeinu, Lord our God, you have loved us with everlasting love. This bracha of Ahava, this bracha of love, actually begins with the word Ahava and ends with the word Ahava, Ahavat Olam, that God has loved us with everlasting love. And at the end, the bracha says, Baruch atah Hashem, blessed are you, Lord, Habocha ba'ama Yisrael ba'ahava, who chooses his people, Israel, with love. So if you remember, last week when we were looking at this class, we talked about how Hashem has chosen us. So in this blessing, we ask Hashem to help our hearts remain connected to Torah and to learning and to teaching and to fulfilling the precepts of the Torah. And now we end with Maher v'havei aleinu baracha v'shalom mehera, and bring us in peace. V'havienu l'shalom me'arba kamfas ha'aretz. So hasten and speedily bring upon us blessing and peace. Bring us in peace from the four corners of the earth. Or Shava Om Hagoyim Me'al Tzavarenu. Break the yoke of the nations from our neck. V'tolechenu mehera komamias la'artzenu, and speedily lead us upright to our land. Ki kel poel Yeshuas ata. For you are God who performs acts of deliverance. Uvanu v'charta mikol am v'lashon. You have chosen us from all nations and tongues. V'keraftanu malkeinu l'shimcha hagadol ba'ahava. And having love brought us near. Lahodus l'chol yachetcha li'ava es shemecha. Brought us near, our King, to your great name, that we may praise you and proclaim your oneness and love your name. And then we end, Baruch atah Hashem abocha ba'ama Yisrael ba'ahava. Blessed are you, Lord, who chooses his people, Israel, ba'ahava, with love. So we talk about the fact here that Hashem chose us. And the expression used in this tefillah is "Uvanu v'charta mikol am v'lashon," that you chose us out of all nations and tongues. So what is the meaning of this? You've chosen us from all nations and tongues. So in the book of Devarim, in the Torah tells us, Hashem misine ba v'zorech miseh Lama Hafia Meha Paran. Hashem came from Sinai and shone forth on them from Seir. He appeared from Mount Paran. And on this, the sages tell us that the references to Seir and Paran hint to Hashem's offer of the Torah to the children of Esav and the children of Yishmael, both whom refused to accept it. So there's a teaching of the sages that before Hashem came to the Jewish nation and asked us if we would like to accept the Torah, he went first to the other nations. And only afterwards did he come to the Jewish people. And when he went to the other nations, they asked him what was in the Torah. And to each nation, he told something else. And each nation had a different reason why they could not accept the Torah. And when he came to us, when he came to Bnei Yisrael, to the Jewish people, we responded, Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do, and later we will hear. And in Paparas LaChochma, it's explained that that Hashem's choice over Bnei Yisrael over the other nations is reflected in our tefillas. And we say here, Uvanu v'charta mikol am v'lashon, you chose us from all nations and tongues. If you look at the words nations, and lashon, tongues, meaning the languages, and you look at the gematria of am v'lashon is 502. So we see that the same gematria is for Edom and Yishmael. So Edom, which is Esav, and Yishmael, Edom is 51. The gematria of Edom, Aleph, Dalet, Vav, Mem, 1, 4, 6, and 40 is 51. And Yishmael, which is 10, 340, 71, and 30 is 451. So together, that makes 502. So what's the meaning of this? Uvanu v'charta mikol am v'lashon, that Hashem chose us from all nations and tongues. So if the word nation refers to the physical character of the nation. Every nation has their specific physical character. They have a specific look. It's usually to do with the area that they come from. And Lashon, tongue, is not just the language, but it's also the spiritual character of the nation. And that's why, as we look at the Midrash and we look at the teaching of the sages, how Hashem went to each nation and asked them if they want the Torah, we saw how each nation didn't want to accept the Torah because each nation had its leaning towards a different way of living their life, which would not agree with them to have the Torah which would interfere with that specific lifestyle. So why is lashon, why is language connected to the spiritual character? So in Bereshis, when we see where Hashem created the world, the Torah says, "Vayhi la'adam nefesh chaya," a man became a living soul. And Onkelos explains on this verse, "Vayhi ha'adam lenefesh chaya," man became a living soul, that this refers to the power of speech. Nefesh, soul, refers to the power of speech. So every part of creation has a soul, so to speak, but what's different about the soul of a person, of a human being, is that the human being has the power of speech, and that involves the tongue. So that's the tongue that we have is created in a specific way that we are able to speak, and speak words that reflect our ability to understand. And every single nation has their different spiritual makeup, and different, like we said, they have their physical makeup and their spiritual makeup. And we thank Hashem that out of all the nations of the world, Hashem chose Bnei Yisrael for his mission of transforming this world and revealing godliness in the world. So, so that is the frame of mind as we're coming to, and the thoughts that we are developing as we are coming closer to Shema, which is really the central tefillah and the central theme of our life in this world, our relationship with Hashem, and our beliefs that impact the way we live our life. It's interesting, we say the end of this bracha, we're thanking Hashem for choosing us, and what do we say? We say, Lahodos lacha, Hashem chose us and brought us close to him to give thanks to you, and to proclaim your oneness, which is what the Shema is all about. We're going to get into that soon. And love your name. And the blessing ends with the words, Baruch atah Hashem habocher ba'ama Yisrael ba'ahava, who chooses his people Yisrael ba'ahava, with love. The word habocher, who chooses, is in the present. It's not in the past, not that God chose us many years ago and by default we are still in that position of chosenness, but rather habocher, who chooses us every single day. Every single day, Hashem renews his love for us, as we ourselves also renew our love for Hashem in our tefillas, in our declaration of the Shema, which we are coming up to you. And just as we have this fresh relationship with Hashem, we should have this fresh relationship with Hashem, that every single day, it's as if today we received the Torah. It's as if today we were chosen by a Kadosh Baruch Hu. That is a reflection of how Hashem views us. Every day he renews his decision to choose us and chooses us anew every single day. So this brings us to the Kriyas Shema, to the recitation of the Shema. So all that we've learned in the tefillahs, in the prayers, from the Modeh Ani until now is really all leading up to this Shema. Remember, we said that tefillah is a ladder. We start with the feet of the ladder on the ground and we climb the rungs of the ladder. And now we come to the Shema, which the Shema is, we say the Shema immediately after the bracha of the Shema, which talks about the love of Hashem, because as we're going to see, after the introductory verses, we launch straight into the mitzvah of the Ahavta es Hashem Elokecha. So we've prepared ourselves for this tefillah, which talks about the love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the love of Hashem. The Shema really contains the essence of the faith of Bnei Israel, of the Jewish people. And that's why, because it's such a powerful prayer and it speaks about our essential connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to God, that's why this is a prayer that has really been with us throughout our history. We know many Jews, these were the last words before they left this world. Al Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying the name of God, dying merely because they were Jews. And these words of the Shema would be their last and parting words from this world. Because this tefillah, the Shema, really contains the essence of our faith. And there are 3 paragraphs of the Shema. We're going to go through them chapter by chapter and understand the meaning of the Shema. Before we get into the meaning of the Shema, because it's such an important tefillah, it's such an important prayer, I would like to do some of the halachas, the laws surrounding the recitation of the Shema. So this verse, the first paragraph of the Shema, comes from the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy, verses 4 to 9, and that's the first paragraph of the Shema. And in the 7th verse, it says, "V'shinantam levanecha, v'dibarta bam, b'shiftecha b'veisecha, uvelechtecha b'derech, uveshachpecha, uvekumecha." You shall teach them to your sons and speak of them, meaning to your children, and speak of them when you sit in your house and when you walk on the way and when you lie down and when you rise up. So based on the words, when you lie down and when you rise up, that is where the mitzvah to recite the Shema twice daily comes from. Once in the morning and once in the evening. You'll notice in the Siddur, we don't find the Shema in the prayer, in the Mincha prayer. We find it in the Shachris, we find it in the Ma'ariv, because this is based upon this pasuk, this verse, when you lie down and when you rise up. Notice when you lie down and when you rise up, that's the order of the day. The Jewish day starts at night. Also, you have to lie down in order to get up. So that follows, it makes sense. So there are 3 paragraphs in the Shema. The theme of the first paragraph is the acceptance of Ol Malchus Shamayim, the acceptance of the heavenly yoke, of the mitzvahs, of everything that Hashem wants from us. In the second it's the second is actually more the mitzvahs, and the third is the remembering the going out of Mitzrayim, going out of Egypt. Actually, we see in the word Shema is the acronym for Su'u Maram Einechem, lift up your eyes. And it's also all Malchus Shamayim, backwards, Ayin, Mem, Shin, all Malchus Shamayim, accept upon yourself the heavenly yoke. And when should you accept upon yourself the heavenly yoke? At all times of the day. Again, in the word Shema, Shachris, Mincha, and Arvis. In the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening. So, the Sefer HaChinuch writes that when a person reciting the Shema remembers the unity of Hashem and the kingship of Hashem, that Hashem supervises everything, then that person will take everything to heart and will remember to appreciate Hashem's presence in this world, and that every action that we take makes a difference, and that Hashem knows everything that we do. And not only does he know everything that we do, but he also knows everything that we think. And these are sure ways for a person to be protected from any kind of behavior that would be untowardly. So we do this in the morning, we do this in the evening, and it helps us to remain focused. Our sages tell us that the reward for reciting the Shema twice daily is even greater than the reward for studying Torah the rest of the day. And we know that Torah study, we say this in the morning, but Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, that the study of Torah is equal to all the other mitzvahs. So if we say that about Torah study, and the sages tell us that reciting the Shema is even greater than that, we can understand the holiness and the great effect of the reciting of the Shema. And hopefully, as we learn the meaning of the Shema and how the Shema should be recited, we can bring this into our daily recitation of the Shema. Now, who is obligated to read the Shema? We said that the Shema is supposed to be read twice a day. So we're all obligated, men and women alike. There is a difference, however, because the reciting of the Shema is actually a time-bound mitzvah. The Shema has to be recited by a certain hour of the day, and you can look it up online. It's different. It depends on the time of the year, what time the recitation of the Shema has to be completed by. But for us women, it's important to realize and to know we are not bound to that part of the mitzvah, that it has to be recited by a certain time. And this is something that we should really begin to teach our children from a very, very young age, and that they should recite the Shema daily. Now, before reciting the Shema, we have the Birchas Shema, we have the brachas of the Shema that we have just finished looking at over here, and these should be recited before the Shema, and then immediately following the Shema is the Amidah, the silent prayer. Now, the best time to say Shema is after it begins to get light in the morning. So we shouldn't say the Shema when it's still nighttime. If we want to fulfill, the truth is women don't have to worry about this, because we can say the Shema whenever it works. We don't have this obligation of the time-bound aspect. If a person is not going to be able to daven right away, they should start their day, though, having recited the Shema. That they should recite the Shema and go through the day having recited the Shema, because we want this mitzvah of the Shema, the recitation of the Shema, to influence the way our day is going to be. And then the evening Shema is said once night has come. Besides the Shema that we say at Shachris and at Mariv at the evening, there's also the Shema that we say every evening before we go to bed. We'll get to that later on down the road, but there is prayers that are recited before retiring, before going to sleep at night, and part of that is the recitation of the Shema. And it's certainly something that one should educate their children, that before they go to sleep at night, they finish the day with the recitation of the Shema. Now, in the Nusach HaSiddur, you look at the Siddur, there is on page 588, there are laws of the recitation of the Shema. So the Chazan finishes the blessing, Haboche ba'ama Yisrael ba'ahava, silently, quietly, and then the Shema is recited. One should be careful to recite all 3 chapters of Shema with kavana, which means with intent and concentration, in awe and reverence. Now, this is a very important thing. Generally speaking, when we say the Shema, we should be seated. And the reason for this is that we remain in one place and we can give the concentration to the Shema that is needed. Because it's such an important tefillah, because it's such an important prayer, when reciting the Shema, we want to make sure that we say every word correctly and the way it's supposed to be said, and not that we should say words that have a different meaning. So, for example, while reciting the verse Shema, meaning the very first verse, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, one should pause while reciting this verse to convey the following meaning. So you say, Shema Yisrael, and I'll translate, Hear, O Israel, pause. Hashem Elokeinu, the Lord who is our God, you pause. Hashem Echad is the one God. So again, instead of just rattling off that verse, we're going to talk about the fact, we'll get to that afterwards, that when we say this verse of the Shema, actually what we do is we take our right hand and we cover our eyes. This gives us the opportunity to be distracted to not be distracted from anything around us, and to be able to concentrate at the tefillah at hand. Now, one who draws out, i.e. in meditation, not in articulation, the daled of echad will merit the blessing of longevity. So when we say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. So the word in Hebrew for echad, for one, is echad. At that time, one should draw out in meditation the daled of echad, which we're going to talk about. What is this daled of echad? What we should be thinking about as we say the word echad, which means one. First of all, it's also very important to make sure to pronounce the daled, really pronounce it, and not that it should come out like a resh. So echad, because it could come out like if we don't say it properly, it could come out with a resh, and a resh means other. God forbid, we don't want to make such a pronouncement. We're talking about the oneness of Hashem, and we should pronounce the daled, which the numerical value of daled is 4, long enough to acknowledge that Hashem and Hashem's kingdom rules over the 4 directions in the world: north, south, east, and west. So that is, we just said before that one who draws out in meditation the daled of echad will merit the blessing of longevity. So what's the drawing out? The drawing out is this thought of the daled, which is 4, that Hashem's sovereignty is in all 4 directions.
That's probably where the song Hashem is here, Hashem is there comes from.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Up, up, down, down, right, left, and all around.
Yeah,
Here, there, and everywhere. Yes, that's where it comes from. One should not slur over the ches, but should draw it out slightly for the length of the time it takes to affirm Hashem's sovereignty in the 7 heavens and on earth. Okay, so ches, which is the second letter in the word echad, echad meaning one, the letter ches, so aleph of echad is the oneness of Hashem, the unity of God. Ches is 8, has a numerical value of 8, that God's sovereignty is over the 7 heavens and the earth. And that's what one should think about as they draw out the pronunciation of the ches. Slightly, just to be able to think about the fact that Hashem rules over the 7 heavens and on earth. Now, one should enunciate the letter Yud of Shem when we say, so we say Shema Yisrael. You know, think about how sometimes when we say a verse or a sentence that we used to, we kind of merge words together and letters get lost. So these halachas are telling us to be specific. We always need to be mindful, especially when we're praying and studying Torah, but specifically when we're saying the Shema. So that's why we're very, very punctilious as we recite the Shema. So we say Shema and make sure to be distinct. Finish that word Shema before going to the next word, Yisrael. So it will not sound like Israel. Shema Yisrael. But you could think about how the ayin, that silence, can be drawn into the second word. We don't want to do that. So Shema Yisrael. And the same also with the letter Yud. V'hayu hadvarim, right? V'hayu, finish the word, v'hayu hadvarim. One should also pause slightly between Shema and Baruch Shem. So Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Pause. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuso La'olam Va'ed. If the sentence Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuso La'olam Va'ed, blessed is the name of the glory, blessed be the name of the glory of his kingdom forever and ever. If that is left out, then a person has to repeat the Shema. So their recitation of Shema is not complete without the addition of this pasuk, of this verse. And you might be asking yourself the question, why is that even a thing? If it was missing, it wasn't completed. But if you go to the source of the Shema, that verse is not included. This verse was added, and we're going to discuss this as when we get back to that, when we finish the halachas, the laws over here. But nevertheless, it was included. Our sages included it. Our avos included it, and it's an important part of the Shema and needs to be included. So if somebody recited Shema and left out that verse, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuso La'olam Va'ed, then the Shema has to be repeated. One should pause briefly between Baruch Shem and V'yahavta. So Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuso La'olam Va'ed. Pause. Just like when there's a musical piece, there are parts that you have to pause by. Someone's singing, someone's playing a musical instrument. Take that pause. If you're finding it difficult to do, take a pencil or a pen and make a little marker where you're supposed to pause. One should pause between Hayom and Al Levavecha, and between Hayom and Li'ahava, between today and on your heart, and between today and to love, so as not to imply that only today should it be upon your heart, but not tomorrow. So what we're saying is V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha, you should love the Lord your God b'chol levavecha, with all your heart, b'chol nafshecha, with all your soul, b'chol ma'odecha, with all your might. V'hayu hadvarim ha'ele, and these words should be asher anochi metzavacha hayom, that I have commanded you today, comma, al levavecha, upon your heart, as opposed to asher anochi metzavacha, that I've commanded you hayom al levavecha, today upon your heart, because that implies that today it's important to be on your heart, and then that excludes tomorrow. We don't want to do that. So we have to make sure to put our commas and pauses in the right place, because it needs to constantly be on our heart. Today, tomorrow, the next day, always upon our heart. One should pause between two successive words in which the first ends and the second begins with the same letter, so as not to swallow one of the letters. For example, al levavecha. So it says in the third line down of V'ahavta, it says asher anochi metzavacha hayom, that I've commanded you today. So these words should be al, upon, levavecha, your heart. So the word al finishes with a lamed. The word levavecha begins with a lamed. You don't want to slur those two. You want to pronounce each one, al levavecha. And actually you will notice in the Nusach HaRisidah, and perhaps in other Sidurim as well, there is a bar in the middle. There's a line that reminds us to do this. Al levavecha. any time that you have that situation where the one word begins with the letter that the previous word ended with, you want to make sure to pronounce it properly. One should pause between two successive words in which the first ends and the second begins with the same letter, so as not to swallow. Oh, that's we just said. The Shema must be recited audibly. If it was not, one has still fulfilled the precept, provided the words were articulated with one's lips. If one cannot utter the words, one should think them in their mind. So really the mitzvah of prayer is fulfilled by uttering words. Very, very important concept in tefillah, in prayer. Just looking at the words or thinking of the words is not the way that prayer is fulfilled. And specifically the Shema, we have to be very mindful. We should say it loud. Loud doesn't mean we have to say it on the top of our voices, but the words should be heard. At least the words should be pronounced, and that's a very important concept in tefillah in general, and it's underlined when we come to the Shema. One must pay attention to the meaning of the words while reciting the verses Shema Yisrael and Baruch Shem, Hear O Israel, and blessed is the name. If one did not pay attention, they must be repeated. When praying with a congregation, they should be repeated in an undertone so as not to appear like one who ascribes to duality of deities. In other words, that the whole congregation made a statement and then somebody else makes a statement afterwards that opposes it. So it should be said in an undertone. If someone didn't have the concentration and they're with a minyan, they're with a congregation, and they have to repeat it, they should repeat it quietly. If one becomes aware of his lack of intent only after concluding the entire section, it must be repeated from the beginning. So there's a very important concept of kavanah in general in davening, but with the Shema, it's underlined even more. From V'ahavta, which is really the first paragraph of the Shema, onward, one fulfills his obligation post facto by the mere recital of the words. That means, obviously, we should be concentrating and thinking. But if we concentrated and thought about the first two, Shema and Baruch Shem, and then afterwards, from there on, and it was kind of an automatic way of praying, it does fulfill the obligation. And we say that's b'di'evet, that's after the fact. Lechatchila, in the first place, we should have concentration. The obligation for the Shema to include 248 words is fulfilled when the Chazan repeats the word Hashem Elokeichem Emes. So there's supposed to be 248 words, which represents the 248 positive commandments in the Torah. There are 3 missing. So in other words, there are only 245. But when the Shema is, we get to Anochi Hashem Elokeichem, we say Hashem Elokeichem Emes, and that is repeated. So that's 3 extra words. In the Nusach Hari, we don't have the minhag, the custom, but in other Sidurim, there are 3 words. Kel Melech Ne'eman, that God is a faithful king, that is added as an introduction to the Shema. So some hold that is part of the 3 extra words to bring the number to 248. So that is an introduction to the Shema. With Mitzvah Hashem, we're going to look at the words, but I want you just conclude with this concept of the covering of the eyes when we say the Shema. So we gave the basic answer, which is that we shouldn't be distracted, and therefore we cover our eyes when saying the Shema. And the Gemara actually traces this practice back to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, that that he would, even in the middle of davening, of learning, he would interrupt his learning to say the Shema, and his students would see that he would cover his eyes when he said this verse, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. There's another explanation given that that as we're going to learn the meaning of the Shema, we're going to see that the meaning of the Shema is much deeper just than there is one God, that there's one God and no other. What we're going to look at is that Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad means Ein Od Milvado, that in actuality there is nothing else. All that exists in this world actually is Hashem, is God. So when we say Hashem Echad, Hashem is one, what we are saying is Ein Od Milvado. There is in essence nothing else besides Hashem, besides God, as Hashem created the world with his speech and continues to create the world every single moment of every single day. And for these few moments, as we are reciting the words of the Shema, we close our eyes. We do not look at the physical world and how it presents itself to us. We close our eyes and we go into this reality of Ein Od Milvado. There is nothing else other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu, other than God. And with this in mind, we go through the rest of the day. We bring that reality into the physical world. And this stays with us until the next time, hopefully until the next time that we say the Shema later on in the evening. So my apologies again for the technical difficulties at the start of this class.
No problem. It was worth it. It was worth waiting, honey.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank
You know
you.
what? I learned something. I didn't know the straight up and down line was between like the two letters, that are the same. So I always wondered what that line meant.
Well, I'm sure that also the line is not always only there. There are other areas that you'll find, but it is about pausing. It is about taking that pause in the davening, and it's such an important thing. We learn to read and we learn to daven, and as we go through life, we realize that we must always continue learning, because there was always something that we didn't learn when we first started, whether we were little in years or little in knowledge. There's always new things to learn, and
absolutely. I never
it's
had the privilege of Hebrew school, so learning Hebrew just alone was some big thing for me. But now I'm learning, the little other things that go along with it.
Exactly. The truth is, Sarah, we can have been born, into a family that taught these things, but sometimes a whole lifetime can go by and these additional teachings somehow slipped through the cracks and a person never knew. So that's why learning is so powerful and so important. Besides the fact that we know how to do things, and it also gives us that additional push and connection to what we are doing, so that we do it with more love and more strength.
Enthusiasm.
Yeah.